This is the Naming Ionic and Molecular Compounds lab. This lab will not require any materials from your lab kit. So let's take a look at what you need to do for this lab. You always are going to begin in the exploration section, and there are a lot of little details as you go through. However, you've already learned how to convert molecular formulas into names, names into compound names, into formulas. You've learned how to name all of these things. So I would suggest just using this as a nice review. Now I will note when you get to the polyatomic ion section, their polyatomic ion chart looks a little bit different from ours. If you like theirs better and you want to print it off, that's fine too. Theirs, it has, well, generally speaking, they have it grouped by like the main ion in there. So nitrogen, they generally have it grouped that way. Like this is Cl. This is actually a really easily mistaked problem here. This is Cl, not Ci. Cl and Ci, not to be confused with C all by itself. So like the C's are grouped together, the Cl's are grouped together, the Crs are grouped together. But we have a chart also. So these are the ones you're going to have to be using in the naming. Also note, don't put like let people be like, oh, I'm just going to Google this. Well, if you Google it, you can end up with the wrong answers for several reasons. Don't put like O3SH. That's actually not correct and it's not going to work. Or if you put this in parentheses in a name and put a little 2 to the side of it, that does not mean that you're also allowed to say H2S2O8. All right, so parentheses and a little 2 outside is correct. Don't then multiply the 2 in. Don't do that. Those are 2 errors I see happen a lot. But a lot of this should be a complete review for everything, except for this little section called diatomic elements. Now, diatomic elements, there are just 7 that come in groups. These are going to be reviewed later in the semester, so they won't show up on a quiz or a test or anything like that. But just know that if you have any of these ones alone, you'll have to, they always come in pairs. Let's move on to the experimentation section, materials-wise. You do not have to have a box of colored pencils or a highlighter. You do not have to have a printer. You do need a phone or a camera or something, but you've been using that for the whole semester because you've been putting stuff in the Dropbox. You do not even need a package of note cards. You can just use a piece of paper. You can tear it up if you want, or you can group everything on a piece of paper. So if you are going to do some writing, which you will, you're going to need a pencil or paper or a pencil or pen, and then also some paper. So as a review, the ones you need the pencil, you need the paper, and you need something to take pictures with. I'm going to go on. All right, so I kind of recommend doing this over a few days. If you're watching this and you don't have time, that's okay too. It's just because like the last 2 parts take some thinking, and this part just takes time to write things down, but it's not hard. You're like copying things onto paper. I'm going to just show you wherever I can put a line in here as a reminder, that's where I can put comments. And this lab does not have a lot of places to put comments. So whenever you see these, you should always read them. They're at the top. Upload these pictures. So there's going to be 4 pictures in the directions below. You need to make sure you also put them in the Dropbox. They're listed in the description of the Dropbox, the assignments Dropbox. So then notice step 1 is going to be listed before step 1 just to make sure you get it before you get into it. It says use the periodic table from your notes. You already have most of the information recorded at this point. Don't print the picture below. We also don't want you to use this chart right here because they have things that aren't rounded to 2 decimal places, and all of the information in our homework is rounded to 2 decimal places and uses a certain periodic chart. So this is a great periodic chart. It's nice, but you don't want to use it for any of the upcoming stuff. Make sure that on your chart, and again, you should already have this labeled from your notes that you were taking, but just make sure that you have the groups labeled. Those are the vertical columns, and then make sure you have like a little legend, and you put your name and date on the table. Honestly, if you just want to like put a rectangle around the group and then like put a little name at the top and not even color code it, that's okay too. Just don't upload a blank periodic chart, right? Make it look like you've done something to it. And if you've done a lot to it, that's fantastic. This step right here, this is all about practicing the common ions. So you can use cards, and if you like them, that's great. Note that on the tests and stuff, you're allowed to use a page of notes. So I would assume you probably have these already written on your notes. If you don't, then you might, instead of using these note cards, and if you use note cards, that's great, it's fine. But instead of that, I was going to suggest to start working on your test study guide and just make a list of these in the corner of all of these ions. Little note, you can group the polyatomic ions onto one note card or a half piece of paper. That's totally fine. If you do separate into note cards, make sure they're overlapping so that I can tell you didn't do just one note card, right? You need to do all of them. So they've got that table with the polyatomic ions. You got to make sure you remember the charge, formula, and name. You're going to repeat the same thing with the acids. There aren't as many acids. And then you're going to repeat it with the diatomic. And that's not supposed to say acids, it's just saying diatomics. Again, they've got a list of tables. You click on the table, you're just rewriting these. It's what you're doing in your own handwriting. You're practicing writing them. Now, there's a bonus point opportunity. Just take a picture of a thumbs up in front of your screen. Make sure that you label it. Just make sure that all the pictures are either in a Word document or you have a PDF combiner when you're putting them in the lab. All right, so for these steps, there are common errors because what you're going to be doing is filling in 4 data tables. So please subscript all the numbers. There's a good example. The bold is what you want to do. Don't do the other thing because you'll get points taken off. And there are so many of these. You don't want all those points taken off. Formulas have certain letters that should be capitalized. Make sure you do that. And they are shown on the chart. So whatever the formula symbol is, like the NA, just do it exactly how it's shown on the chart. Capital N, lowercase a. Now here's the tricky part everyone gets mixed up on. You need, when you're writing the whole name out, it has to be lowercase. And sometimes your like Word document, or if you have like some kind of Grammarly or something, it'll try to autocorrect them in the fill-in spots. So make sure it's not autocorrected. Make sure that you do not have capitals. Aluminum has to have the American spelling, not the British spelling. Please use that for all the elements. For example, you don't want to use the old Greek or the old Latin for iron. So iron is iron. Its symbol is Fe. And yeah, you can Google it and you can find a ferric and a ferrous. That is not what we want, and that won't count. You need to follow the naming rules that have been set up that are the standard ACS naming rules. So make sure you're labeling any metals that have like alternate names. Don't use them. Again, also sometimes some things have common names like gypsum. Again, don't use that name. Use the formal name. You've been taught how to do it. And again, the only reason you'd know that it was gypsum is if you were Googling, right? So it's not going to help you in the long run to do that because you're going to need to answer questions about naming and you need to do it fairly quickly. So if you're spending all this time trying to look up answers and stuff, you haven't actually understood the rules. And when push comes to shove, you won't have enough time to answer everything. As a reminder on how to subscript, if you are not in a data chart, so like if you're answering a question, a menu will pop up that you won't see until you start to type. And they've got the subscript buttons. And if you're in the data tab, there'll be a keyboard that pops up when you open the tab. Sometimes though you lose the keyboard, so just close it and open it again, the tab. Sometimes we're going to get buggy and you have to highlight a number and then see the sub and subscript menu. So this is a comment for step 1A. Here's a comment for step 1B and C, and a comment for step 5. If you scroll down and 7, there's actually not any other place to put, like it won't let me put them anywhere else. So that's why they're all at the top. So what you might want to do, since we're out the steps, read step 1. View the first formula in data table 1. Determine if it's molecular or ionic and record it in data table 1. So if we go up to data table 1, you know, it's in here. I can't click on it because I don't want to give away answers, but there's going to actually be a total of 20 things that you're going to label this way. So you're going to use molecular. This is the same thing as saying covalent. And then you're going to use ionic. So this is a note on how to get it right. So if the first element is on the right, it's molecular of that staircase. If the first element is on the left, it's ionic. And then you're going to fill out all of those. I'm going to go back to B. Once it's molecular, make sure you record it with the prefix. So this is supposed to help you because then I wouldn't go in order. Once you've labeled like ionic or molecular, I would jump to all of the molecular ones right here and make sure that you use the prefixes and that the last word ends in IDE. Remember about mono, it's weird when it's on the first word. Ionic stuff have no prefixes. They still end in IDE. And if the first is from the short transition middle section, you're going to need a Roman numeral. So these are all tips to make sure you get this right. And then this is all about naming things. All right. And then right here, now you're going to be given the name and you have to figure out the formula. Again, make sure you're subscripting. Make sure you're using parentheses when you're supposed to use parentheses. That's what you need to do in this section. And then you're going to have 20 of those. Then you're going to have 20 of these. These are either polyatomic ions or acids. You know it's an acid if it has an H in the front. And so 5A, I'm going to jump up here to 5A because it had a comment, or 5. So if it has an H and an AQ, you name it using the acid naming rules. Sometimes people will try to start naming these using the molecular naming rules, but no, no, no. If it has an H and an AQ, you're going to use the acid naming rules. Those are completely different from table 1 and 2. It's got like the ick acid and the us acid. That's how they're supposed to all look. You have to have the word acid there. Again, here's some tips on the most commonly missed acid questions, and those ones are actually ones that need Roman numerals. Here's another thing about step 7. So finally, in 7, this is the last data table. Again, the table 3 is naming things with polyatomic ions and acids, and table 4 is then when you're given the name, can you do the formula? And there are 20 of those. Then you have the final questions. Make sure you look at this. There's a tip here. There's a tip here. Here's a tip here. And then finally, before you submit, make sure, are all the numbers subscripted? Like, click back through your tables. Are all the charges correct? Did you use the right symbols? All right. Hopefully this helps.